Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's conversation, Nonviolence Resistance in the Era of Trump and Beyond. My name is Juanita Esguerra, and I am Head of Research at Livelihood, and I'm really excited to be here with you today and with our very special guests. And we're going to talk about something that's really important, because over the past decade, we have seen something really troubling take hold, and that is a wave of authoritarianism, nationalist rhetoric, and open attacks on civil liberties. And it's not just the government of Donald Trump in the United States. Governments across the world are silencing dissent, rolling back rights, and tightening control. But people are pushing back, and they're not doing it with megaphones or viral headlines. They're doing it through strategy, solidarity, and everyday actions. From student encampments in the United States to grassroots organizations in authoritarian states, people are mobilizing, and they're showing that resistance doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. It just has to be rooted. One example is our very own laureate, Issa Amro, who is a Palestinian human rights defender based in Hebron. And in recent weeks, attacks on his home have intensified. And from Right Livelihood, we have been reporting on this, helping amplify Issa's message, a message that conveys what it is like to live under occupation. But Issa's resistance is grounded in presence, in staying, in witnessing, and in documenting. In the occupied Palestinian territories, just being is considered a threat. And yet, Issa keeps showing up, not with weapons, but with truth. And that brings us to our conversation today, and I am joined by two extraordinary guests that know a lot about what it takes to resist, not just theoretically, but also practically. So I'm very happy to first introduce Jamila Raqib. Jamila is the executive director of the Albert Einstein Institution, and she's one of the world's leading experts on strategic nonviolent action. She has trained movements across the globe to resist authoritarianism with focus and discipline. And she also speaks deeply about how we move beyond symbolic inclusion, especially for women, into spaces where participation actually shifts the outcome. Thank you, Jamila, and we're so happy that you're here.
Thank you so much.
And I'm also very excited to introduce Kerstin Bergeå, who is the chair of Svenska Freds, which is the Swedish Peace and Arbitration Society. And under her leadership, the world's oldest peace organization is advancing disarmament, challenging militarism, and pushing for a policy that puts conflict prevention, international law, diplomacy, and human rights at the center. A policy that truly invests in mediation, diplomacy, and efforts to overcome root causes such as injustice, poverty, and oppression. So with these inspiring guests, we're going to have a very short conversation about what resistance looks like right now, what is working, and what is the role of gender in shaping successful resistance movements. So I'm going to start asking a question to Jamila. And picking up on Issa's story, Jamila, and thinking about the broader moment that we're in, you've talked a lot about unlikely alliances in building effective resistance. So I would like to ask you, how do you see this playing out right now in places like Palestine, but also in the United States and other locations where polarization and threats to the freedom of speech are increasing?
Well, thank you so much. First of all, it's great to be having this conversation at such a critical time for the expression of these ideas. I think you described the situation well. Right now, we're seeing a polarization, a sort of atomization, as we would call it, of our societies. Gene Sharp talks about this idea that if people feel like they're kind of individual units, then taking collective action becomes very difficult. And this is the sort of thing we need. I think people are recognizing that they need to act, that we're facing real dangers in our societies, but the how to act becomes a bit more tricky. And I think even for those who realize that actually, it is a unified movement that we need. It is one that is representative, representative of the different groups in our societies. But then, they think that that means we need to have a centralized leadership. And in the absence of a centralized leadership, I mean, many of our societies don't have this in the style of, Gandhi or King. And they're saying, well, what are we supposed to do? But I think, what if we asked, instead of saying, where's our Gandhi? Where is our leader? What if we said, what does it take to be truly strategic and coordinated? And I think it starts really with having a clear vision of the future, asking questions like, understanding the terrain, right? What is the nature of the problem? What enables the harm? What are the institutions that are causing these or forming these policies that don't meet the needs of our communities? And also, what are the tools available to us? What works and what doesn't work? And how can these tools be better used? And we're talking here about citizen-led, organized, nonviolent resistance as a very important part of the ecosystem of action that needs to be taken. But I think ultimately it is having a vision. People need to believe in that participating in the struggle is going to win them something, win them a better society. Are our movements doing that? Because often we're mainly just in opposition to the existing system. And we need to have a positive vision, because it's that positive vision that is going to build recruitment, and that is also going to make people feel less isolated. And that has to be really focused on, like, how does it meet people's needs? And you talked about alliances and coalitions, and I'm glad you mentioned Isa Amro in Palestine, because even under the most difficult circumstances, what Isa manages to do so well is to enable people in society to participate, to carve a role, to see a role for themselves, to see that what they do matters, that it can actually create a real headache to the oppression, to the to the opponent. But he goes further and he says, actually, I extend a hand to even people in my opponent group, and I see the humanity of my opponent, those who are maybe benefiting from the existing system. And I think this is how you really truly build a movement that includes, the type of people and groups that can help you to win and then to build a sustainable peace.
Yeah. Thank you, Jamila. I think it's so relevant to not just be critical, as you say, but also have a proposal, something that gives people hope and a vision of the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I would love to hear from you, Kerstin, your experience in the field of peace building and mediation. Are you also seeing these unlikely alliances, and does this give you hope?
It does, and I see them, but I'm also struggling with this vacuum of what everyone is asking. But if not NATO, what if? And we have to explain, and we also have to meet the fear that people are feeling and reaching for these militaristic views of conflict, handling conflicts. But over to the alliances, I can give you an example from my movement, the Swedish Peace and Arbitration Society. We every year go to the general meeting of the Sweden's biggest weapons manufacturer, then they called Saab, and we enter that meeting and ask critical questions. We have one chair, so we can be in the room. And this year, and also last year, we went together with Fridays for Future. And then so we work in a coalition then with the environmentalists and the youth, and they also were outside together with our groups outside this meeting in Linköping. But they were also inside with us and asking questions. I think 30 minutes we were filibustering the meeting, asking critical questions, and there was no shareholders that could get rid of the information that in Sweden, 37% of the arms export goes to undemocratic countries. So that was really a message we were sending, and I think that was an important alliance that we have used recently. We have the biggest Gustav Skarsgård. He is really supporting us. He's an actor. Actor was the missing word there. Yeah, exactly that. He's very proud of our broken rifle symbol that our movement has, and shares it with his grace and speaks out. So that's also alliance that is really important for us, because we have to be part of the culture where people live and be shown as an alternative. And maybe I can be in the news saying, but he's, you know, reaching other. And I mean, working with culture, and actually 150 satirists,
Signatories?
Satirists, is that the word?
Satirists, comedians type of
that is also painting, artists. And I mean, that's has really giving us strength to feel that we have the artists on our side, and I think that gives us also the hope you were talking about, that we are many and that we are reaching broader with our message. Yeah,
that's great.
Thank you, Kerstin. Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, and definitely, I think art and culture and like people who work either in like the film industry or music, they have a lot of following.
Exactly.
So it's really great to get them on your side and get the message out there.
Yeah, the platforms are.
Yeah, exactly.
There's an important question there, which is when we're trying to make change in our societies. I mean, what are the groups and institutions through which we can work that have legitimacy, that have a means of communication and tools? And I think this is where we often leave. You know, we often, you know, artists are at the forefront of these movements, but I think they need to be integrated in a bit of a very deliberate way of the type that you're describing.
Yeah. I think that leads me to the next question I wanted to ask you, which is about strategy. Because I think, Jamila, you've said like often like spontaneous uprisings, they burn out if they're not backed by and accompanied by long-term planning. So I wanted to ask you, are you seeing like movements right now that are balancing that, you know, like emotion of the uprise with also like a long-term thinking and strategic action?
I mean, look, it's not easy. We're looking at a world where actually our opponents are their strategy. They have a strategy. They have a playbook, and it's to throw us off balance. It's to keep us like constantly reacting with every new violation. And as long as we're distracted, then where is the time for careful thinking and planning, capacity building, strategic planning? So that's the situation we're facing. But I mean, we that's, you know, that's the conditions. We still have control over what our movements do, a recognition that this constant reaction to violations simply does not work, and we actually enable the status quo. So then we have to go back to the drawing board, and that is looking at I mean, how much time do you have to talk about like the need for strategic planning, and then how actually do it? But to recognize that, you know, the understanding what enables the system, as I said earlier, and then what type of actions are likely to change that system, and that really requires an understanding of, you know, the battlefield or the terrain, let's say, right? The opponent system, and also the movement. Where are we weak? Where are we strong? Same with our opponent. And understanding, like, how can we develop these kind of component campaigns that can help grow power for the movement and also undermine the sources of power for the harmful system? This is a kind of grand overview of strategic planning as we understand it. But then your question about what movements are doing today to actually engage in this kind of strategic planning, I think they're recognizing there is a need for that. They're trying to access resources. They're trying to access case studies that can offer insight. We talk a lot in the human rights space about the need to be inspired. I think people are already inspired. They're actually searching for solutions. They're searching for workable solutions that can deliver real wins. They're searching for power, a way to actually get it for their communities, usable power that can, you know, that can build that future. So I see a couple of movements that I think are really important to watch. And that is, I have some notes here to make sure I get it right. I think the two cases that illustrate this best, because we're often drawing from movements that took place like 50 or 100 years ago. And, you know, I mean, we need to make sure that we communicate that this is real. This is happening today.
And the world has changed.
The world has changed, and that when we don't pay attention to the cases that are going on today, we're sending a very dangerous message to those people that actually violence that gets the international community's attention. So when these very, very impressive displays of people power happen, it's on us to not just be momentarily inspired by them, but to really study what happened, what worked, how were they successful, and what cases did they experience like short-term defeats that they then had the resilience to get over. And this is, again, back to the cases. So we're seeing in Bangladesh in August 2024, a government that had been in place for 15 years, the dictatorship of the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, she was forced to resign by a completely student-led, non-violent, very organized, very disciplined student movement, but not just students, that also recruited and brought in the participation of masses of the population. Eventually, it was obviously hundreds of thousands of people that did more than just, so initially the movement started as an anti-corruption struggle against a specific policy. And if it had stayed just that, and it was met with repression. So if it had stayed just that, then the movement would have collapsed. It would have fizzled out. But they recognize that not only do they want to do away with corruption, they want to remove the conditions under which corruption can flourish. And that's a very different question. That requires a broader based movement that has the capacity not just to force a resignation of the chief executive, but also build the new society. And that's sort of what we're seeing. So it's evolved a lot since then. And this is, obviously less than a year. It's mobilized very diverse support, and it's really undermined the legitimacy of the regime. Their tactics are very diverse, or were very diverse during the struggle period. They used a lot of economic methods and boycotts, which sometimes we forget. Street mobilizations alone are just simply not enough. And they are now very much concerned about the question of transition, recognizing that trading one oppressive system for another is not what we want, but that actually, changing the actual conditions in society. And so that's what you're seeing. You're seeing the formation of political parties that are going to force the transitional government to stay true to the goals and objectives of a movement where people sacrificed a lot. So obviously I'm really excited about what's happening in Bangladesh, and I'm sad and concerned that it doesn't really, make it to our news very often. And do I have time just to share about what's happening in Serbia, which I think is also a really impressive case of people power that has been taking place over the past maybe over 6 months. And they have a very, very interesting, so again, student movement mainly started out of the colleges. It started as a response to a accident which killed 16 people, which people say is really due to government negligence and corruption. So a government failure caused this accident that really created this spark that then the movement created structures that are now making sure the movement can be sustainable in the short term, and also, like Bangladesh, making sure that whatever change is achieved it can be defended. And so now they've the latest. I mean, there's a whole kind of way in which they're doing this, including creating these very non-hierarchical assemblies where people can be involved and participate and be involved in the decision making, and then. They're saying that their movement's being overlooked, by European leaders. So they just did in April, they did a 1,300 kilometer bike ride from Serbia to Strasbourg to say, we have the commitment, we have the discipline, and we're not going away. We're demanding this change, and the world better pay attention. So I think these are two movements that show that they have the staying power, not just to demand change, but also to make sure they can defend it.
Thank you. That's fascinating. And it brings me to the next question that I have, because participation is so important, right? In these types of movements and coalitions, and having the space for diverse actors to come in. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the role of gender. And I mean, you both operate in spaces where women's voices and participation and leadership is often overlooked or undervalued. So I would like you to tell us what shifts when women are not just included but centered in protest movements, in peace building and mediation.
Well, what we've seen in different peace processes is that the outcome of sustainable peace is more likely if also the process is exactly as you say, an inclusive one.
And there's data for this.
Yes,
like the research proves
exactly,
this.
exactly. It does. It will become more sustainable if there is a process with different groups and women groups, for example. It's half of the population. And we will see in the NATO summit soon, there will be very few women there. And there's such important decision about our tax money, how it's going to be used for more weapons, weaponizing the world, militarizing the world. And why isn't there? Oh, it's like, I think Meloni will be there, but it's extremely few women and very militaristic decisions and debates will go on. And I think it's just, I think we would talk, at least in the peace movement, we're talking about that we have to be part of the, peace processes, but we also have to be part of these processes of militarization because we don't want them. So we are really trying hard for that, but also it is important in the non-violent way of thinking that the process in itself is important. It's the means are important. It's not just the result, and that's why it's so important also that the facts show that it will become more sustainable if also the process is really integrated and a good one.
Thank you so much, Kerstin. What about in your experience, Jamila?
I would totally agree with what you shared. I think we often think, we're sitting here in Sweden, of egalitarian society. And I think we tend to think that women's inclusion is somehow like a favor to women or like a really nice thing that we do, or it's like ethically right. But actually it's strategically important. And that the results of these processes, whether negotiations or whether the struggle period, right? Nonviolent resistance is very much linked. The presence of women, not just the presence of women, but the meaningful inclusion of women in leadership roles. We know women have been at the forefront of movements throughout history, but this role has been overlooked. And I think when it's overlooked, it's so problematic because women today, how can people know what's possible for the future if we don't know what's been made possible by brave women in the past? So first of all, the history overlooks participation of women. And then I think today we're seeing also that they often have to fight to be at the forefront of movements, yet there they are. And nonviolent resistance is a type of action that depends on numbers. It depends on the participation of as many people in society as possible. So first of all, mass movements are more likely to emerge with the participation of women. The second piece is that movements are more disciplined with the participation of women, especially in terms of resisting the urge to being provoked into violence. And we know that the presence of violence in nonviolent resistance movements decreases their effectiveness. Movements need to stay nonviolent. There's a whole number of dynamics that get introduced in terms of making a movement collapse when you have the introduction of violence, even defensive violence. And we're finding that the presence of women, just like the presence of younger people or like faith-based leaders, faith-based community, different groups actually raise the effectiveness because they bring in regular everyday people, but also because they encourage discipline.
And inspire others in their group to join the movement.
Yes,
as
absolutely.
You said.
Which honestly, this is why the authoritarians don't like women in the movements. In fact, they actually, we've done studies on this, and there's people in the like scholar space that are looking at like one of the most effective like kind of counter-revolutionary tactics opponents use is to use different types of violence against women. Often it's the threat of sexual violence that then makes women who very much accept that they're going to face repression but cannot withstand, that's a different type of violence. And so you find that when that happens, even if it's the threat, sometimes it's the real sexual assaults, they will leave. And now you have crowds of young men usually, and repression becomes much more, sadly, much more acceptable then. And so you find then the pretext for a crackdown. And this is now something that, we're observing in a number of different movements. And one of the places we saw it was in Hong Kong during the Umbrella Movement.
And it also makes me think of Iran, right?
Yeah.
And the Nargis Mohammedini, and that was really powerful. It is a powerful struggle going on. Mentioning powerful struggles that's happening.
Yes.
But it's really led by women.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think you both mentioned this idea that I think it's important to think about the effectiveness. It's the right thing to do from the perspective of values and participation and inclusion, but it has also proven to be linked to sustainable peace being more reachable, and also movements being more effective and maybe less prone to falling into some sort of violence.
Yes.
So I think there's so many reasons to do this. It's just sometimes hard to go against the grain. But I think your examples were really clear. And you've talked a lot about threats, and I would now like to talk about fear, because we've spoken about courage and amazing things that people over the world are doing. But participating in this movement carries a lot of personal risk to people. So I would like to ask you, in your experience, how have you seen that people cope with fear? How do they address it? And how do these movements continue going even when the threats and the risk is there?
We see that in the Right Livelihood family in the Laureate space.
Yeah,
people who, take action under extreme threat, under extreme risk, and who often face and suffer costs for it, cost to their own personal safety, the safety of their families. There's so many examples of that. But I think that maybe the way I look at fear, because it is something that is an obstacle to people taking action. It's something that we've studied a lot. The first I would say is, like, how can we look at it as a strategic question? Fear is obviously another tool of the authoritarians. It's something that basically makes people, even the threat of punishment, right, makes people comply, even before it's actually used. Right? And this is the very, very effective means of it. But if we can figure out a couple of things, one is, like, how can it be a strategic question? How can we design action so that it isn't taking unnecessary risks? So we call the different kind of methods available, like tactics of concentration or tactics of dispersion. And the methods of concentration are obviously protest and occupation, things where a lot of people get into a small space, and they are very, very vulnerable in that situation, especially in societies that have, like, willingness and capacity to use violence against them. Tactics of dispersion are ways in which you can effectively communicate the same thing, and it's often very disruptive, but that don't carry the same risk. Obviously, non-cooperation, boycotts, strikes are some of the most powerful methods, but they don't put people at risk in the same ways. So picking methods matters. And, like, acting out of anger, we understand why people do that, but it is simply not sustainable in the long term when you're facing, repression day after day. And we saw that. We see collapse of movements all the time, or people turning to violence because, they're just they're faced with killings and brutalities every day. So I think picking methods really matters. Methods like, economic methods, stay-at-home methods. These are really powerful methods that don't invite the same repression. We also think that nonviolent discipline is a major piece of reducing risk. A nonviolent movement, and I'm not saying that, just because you're nonviolent, your opponent is going to be nonviolent or peaceful and gentle or kind to you, right? We know anytime you present a threat, you are going to be met with the maximum level of repression that they can get away with. They can get away with a lot less violence when a movement is nonviolent, because it shows the world that attacks were unprovoked. I'm not saying that works in every situation. We're seeing massive violence right now in Gaza, and so there's obviously gray areas, but on the whole, that's what the research shows, that violence is much more difficult to use against a nonviolent movement. And I think training and education, understanding why violence is counterproductive, helps that. And ultimately, like, let's not do action that we don't have the capacity to withstand. Maybe it's time to build strength before we do risky action. That's a question for the individual. So maybe that's an individual question, that's a movement question. And then ultimately, I think we have to normalize fear. That fear is part of what we do. We're facing very powerful opponents that are going to use, again, the maximum level of violence they can get away with. That's a perception of danger we as humans have. That's not a sign of cowardice. It's not a sign of lack of commitment to the cause. So I think understanding in our movements, like what's the mental space we need to be in to act in spite of risk, is something I think that needs to be better known. I think the best movements have done that well. You know, Gandhi, King, probably the Bangladeshis. Others, yeah.
Thank you, Jamila. Is there anything you would like to add, Kerstin?
Oh, I think you said it very well, but of course, to be in support groups, I think is very important, that some of us might take more risk than others. And you mentioned Isa Amro before, that he is not alone. Nargis Mohammedini, other laureates from the Right Livelihood, they are not alone even if they are in jail. So I think this way of supporting each other is really, really a powerful tool that we have to combat fear. But fear is there, and I like it what you said. It's part of it.
Yeah, of doing this work.
Yeah, it's part of it, and it's all up to every individual to decide what risks that they're.
Yep.
Yeah, but I think you brought two really important points. One is it's about like strategic calculation as well.
Yes.
And I think what you say about community and solidarity and knowing that people are not alone
Yes,
is something that really helps us, because there's a psychological aspect to it as well, like a mental health aspect to it. So it's really, I think community and interpersonal relations are really important on that. I do have one last question before we finish. I would like to ask you, what is one piece of advice that you would want to give maybe some of the people who are listening, and maybe they want to act, they feel like they want to do something, but they're not sure where to start. So what is one piece of advice that you would like to give them?
Just one.
Or it can be more than one.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, maybe I start. Well, don't lose hope. Don't get paralyzed by all this craziness and authoritarianism that is shocking us right now in this wave. There will come new waves, and choose something, choose a target where you really feel you want to see a change happening. And I remember very well when I met Jamila the first time together with Gene Sharp. I have this photo since that time.
That was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago. And I was bragging that we had a nonviolent course going on for like 30 days or something to him. And he was just looking at me and like, 30 days?
That's it?
Yeah, exactly what he said. It's like, why don't you take yourself seriously? How long does the military train? So I think we have to take ourselves seriously. I mean, we do, but really to strategize and be committed and know how to handle fear and all these things that Jamila has been mentioning. That wasn't one advice, there were many, but over to you.
I like that very much, because I think you said a couple of things there, and you mentioned hope and also the need to prepare. And I think as I said earlier, like the system, right, the opponents, the situation is designed in some ways to keep us really off balance, to keep us feeling like overwhelmed and confused. So I think it's no wonder that people feel that way. But I think for people who recognize like that they have a role to play, that they should realize, or they my advice would be to understand that, you know, they're not alone. They have a really powerful tool, one that's drawn from centuries of what people have done in similar situations. I mean, the terrain has changed. It looks different, but essentially it's about powerlessness and the need to build capacity, and to do that through gaining an understanding of your society, what enables the harm, and then what are the tools you can use to change that. And there are a lot of people getting activated right now, and I think, you know, it's important to realize we're not going to solve everything all at once, but it also doesn't have to take forever. You know, sometimes we achieve change. This is also from our colleague and mentor, Gene Sharp. He said, like, change sometimes comes like in bits and pieces, but then sometimes it comes all at once. And so we recognize the urgency. Like, people are really suffering in our societies. They're also looking for alternatives. I feel like the moment is ripe to offer them something that can offer their, you know, offer their communities like a life of dignity, and that really requires being, you know, imaginative, but also systematic and strategic. It's a big job we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This has been so inspiring. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, and thank you to everyone who was listening online.
Yes, thank you.
I also would like to thank Forum Civ, who is hosting us in this space. And yeah, keep on following us from Right Livelihood. We'll keep on coming back with really interesting content just like this.